Welcome to our lecture, which is given by Christoph Frei. Christoph has a remarkable CV, and I was particularly struck by the fact he holds a diploma in electrical engineering from ETH Zurich, and then studied many subjects at EPFL. So he has a master's in energy economics and management, econometrics from Geneva, and then applied ethics from the Ethics Center in the University of Zurich. Christoph is the Secretary General at the World Energy Council here in London. It's a fantastically responsible role. Christoph was telling me that you have 97 nations now as part of the council. That's absolutely terrific. The organisation is 90 years old. So Christoph, it's an immense pleasure to welcome you back to Imperial College to give your lecture on energy and transition, navigating through uncertainty.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a warm welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here. Not very far from our headquarters, but obviously if you're not from UK, I'm sure in all your countries, I hope we have a member community as well, and otherwise I look forward to working with some of you and hope to convince you during my speech that it's worthwhile working with WEC. What I'd like to do is first give you a very brief sense on who we are as an organization, so you can actually relate to what we are saying. I'm going to then present the latest study that we have just come out a month ago, and just try to put that into context with a few of the developments that we are seeing. And I end up with a bit of a thought provocation, and I'm going to say it already, around storage, but that's what I plan to do. I want to do this in a very interactive way. If you disagree with anything, if you feel like I get it totally wrong or I'm not precise enough, please feel free to interrupt, challenge, provocate. I like that, and so we can have a bit of interactive discussion. First, organization about Energy Council. We have been founded here in the UK. Over 90 years ago, 1923, we were founded. That's a post-World War I context, and just think of it, we have recently celebrated the UNSE for all, the Sustainable Energy for All, and kind of everybody looked at the energy for all as if it was something new, and indeed it was something new in the energy development space. Energy was not really part of development. In a way, discussion. It was not part of the Millennium Development Goals previously. It now has clearly moved in terms of its perceived importance, and is actually seen by the development community as core anchor. But when you look back to the WEC roots, why I'm saying this, when you look back to the WEC roots, 1923, that actually was a time when energy was perceived as critical in development. It was perceived. So we have in a way forgotten about that, and probably one of the most famous quotes out of that time that is probably a witness of that is, I'm not often quoting Stalin, but in this case it's appropriate, because he defined communism as Soviet power plus electricity for all, and the electricity for all was obviously seen as the part that helps development. And I'm just saying that, so we are anchored in this development story. We have expanded, we have always said, for the greatest benefit of all. So we are an organization today in over 90, to be precise, 97 countries, that is producing, consuming countries, OECD, non-OECD, developing, developed. And we have behind those 90 countries over 3,000 organizations that are our members. That is oil, gas, electricity, coal, banks, governments. So 40% is private sector, about a quarter are academia, universities, think tanks, 7% are government. There's only so many ministries that can become a member. You have only so many ministries, so 7% is actually not a low number. And this simply makes us the deepest network in energy, I think the most inclusive and best balanced network in energy. We are not biased to a single technology. We are not biased towards producing or consuming countries. We are not biased towards industrialized or developing. And that, again, is very important, I think, if it's around credibility about what we are saying. I'm saying this to clearly put in front of you, we do our best effort with our governance, with our way of being financed, and with the various checks and balances in our organization to keep our message unbiased and as neutral as possible. Now, what are we doing exactly? We're actually doing three things. We are doing, first of all, we're expanding and deepening our network on a permanent basis. We believe we need to have a strong network, we need to have energy is an important issue, needs to be well understood. It's a complex issue, so we need to deepen our network and find our target audience. Target audience, first of all, is ministers and CEOs. If we cannot influence their thinking, we are useless, so we are spending a lot of time making sure that we're getting close to the target audience. Second, so network first. Second, we are a content-driven organization. We are doing networks, we are doing events, but we are absolutely content-driven, which means 95% of the revenues that we generate are content-based. Only 5% come out of events. And again, that makes us a content-driven organization. And I mentioned it already, the third pillar is events. The most famous one is the World Energy Congress that takes place every 3 years. The next one next year in Istanbul. The digital code of that Congress, for those of you who are interested, it starts the 10th of the 10th. We want 100 ministers there. We will be 100 countries in our membership. The oil price will be 100 again, you can measure that. And we will have 10,000 participants at that event. So that's the digital code of our event. But now, enough introductory talk. What are we doing in content-wise? We say the objective is we want to establish facts, we want to review best practices, and we want to provide thought leadership. And the areas range from policy, regulatory, over technology, over resources, to geopolitical. The most inclusive studies that we are doing is the issues monitor and the scenarios, but then we have lots of deep dives in various areas. I'm going to spend the next half an hour or so with the issues monitor. I'm going to present you what that is. It's your tool, you can use it. All our data are your data, you can have them. They are on the web. All our publications are out there for everybody. So we provide, actually support the public good in energy. Now, issues monitor, the issues survey, we started that 2009, and the idea was the following. We have said actually there's so much change in energy, and we need to find a way to capture perceptions. It's one thing to capture facts, but it's another. Many have said perception is reality, and in energy, I think we have seen a number of events recently that have shown that perception makes reality. Think of post-Fukushima context, how different countries have reacted to that. And in those countries where you have strong reactions, you can end up with an Energiewende. In those countries where you have not very strong reactions, you can continue with the nuclear plant. So perceptions are extremely important, can be very different from one place to another. And that's the reason why we say it's absolutely important to capture perceptions of leaders, of decision makers, ministers, CEOs, thought leaders in all the countries. And that's what this is about. So I'm going to show you how we do it. We have started with 71 leaders providing answers to our survey in 2009. We have gone over 1,000 leaders this year, and so we have seen the rollout is quite dramatic of this. And if you ask yourself for a moment, would you know the global energy agenda, the regional energy agenda, or the energy agenda in a given country? The issue monitor is a great tool to actually know what this is. Now, how does it look like? Just to show what we are actually doing. We are sending this, it's a one-page survey. If you want the CEO or a minister to answer it, it cannot be more than one page. There's many more things you would like to ask, but if you want actually to have a chance that you get an answer, you have to find the right mechanisms. And one side of it is that you need a peer in the country that tells his peers, actually, you fill this out. I want to sit down with you to discuss what we find together, but you need also to make this really short. And that's how it looks like. So a one page with 40 issues on it, 40 issues that cover the macroeconomics, the business environment, the technology side, and provide a helicopter perspective on energy. Now, how do we read it? The results, perhaps just before one more, it's 40 issues, but it's also, there's an impact, uncertainty, urgency, high, mid, low impact, high, mid, low uncertainty, basically short term, mid term, and a bit longer term. Those are the dimensions that we are measuring, and with that we can produce our issues monitor. You can recognize again the uncertainty, impact, that would be high impact, high uncertainty. High urgency means a big bubble hits you now, a smaller, further away, smaller bubble. So there's lots of information on a simple map, but I'm going to hopefully make you love reading those maps and take them whenever you travel to a country or to a region as a starting point to understand what keeps people awake at night in that country. So up here, critical uncertainties, what keeps energy leaders awake at night. Down here, what keeps energy leaders, the low uncertainty, high impact, what keeps energy leaders most busy at work. Let me start with the global map. I'm going to show global first, I'm going to dive into Europe, and then even go into country granularity for UK and Germany as two examples. We can do the same for 28 countries, deep dives, and we have it for all the regions, so there's much more information, but again, there's a limited time here, so I'm going to focus on those. Global first. What keeps globally energy leaders most awake at night? First, the number one issue, highest impact uncertainty is surprise. You could have guessed it, energy price volatility. Last year, it's obviously, or the current context suggests it's all about oil price, but the fact is this has been the number one issue for a number of years already, for at least 5 years, and it was high oil price volatility, high gas price uncertainty with the decoupling of gas prices, solar price collapse, the CO2 price uncertainties. So they're all the key decision factors for energy leaders were actually changing on a permanent basis. So this price volatility is a permanent one, and we have said the new normal, if you are in energy, is that you have to deal with high price volatilities. Now, second issue, climate framework uncertainty. This is a similar issue, obviously. Climate framework uncertainty. What is the CO2 price of tomorrow? Will it be 100 or 4, as currently in ETS, euros per ton of carbon? It will totally change whether you have either a successful or a stranded investment. That's the reason why this is the other high uncertainty, highest uncertainty. Obviously, Paris this year is going to be very important in defining outcomes here. Next, electric storage. This is an issue that has moved up clearly over the past years. It was not as high a few years back, and I will come back to storage. Commodity prices, obviously, it's not only about oil. You have other commodities. Think about biofuels that are critical, so commodity prices are fully up there as well. On the keep me busy at work side, we have renewables and energy efficiency. Those have been high up for quite a while now. So those are the priority action items. Again, keep in mind, 1,000 leaders from over 80 countries would say that. So it's a global perspective, and it hasn't. I think the biggest surprise is, despite recession, despite financial crisis, despite the more difficult context, that those have been and remained the number one action items. And I think that's a very interesting observation. China, India, understanding how growth in China, India affects the energy business, and also getting rid of energy subsidies or dealing in the right way with renewable energy subsidies is the other keep me awake or keep me busy at work issue. Now, what has changed most dramatically since last year? First of all, global recession, large-scale accidents have been pushed downwards. The global recession, I think we can argue, are we totally out of being? We have just heard China announcing the new normal with 7.4 instead of double-digit growth numbers. So clearly we are looking to a new normal there as well. Things are not as dramatically growing, but the confidence is greater certainly than a year ago. On the large-scale accidents, we have just had the 4th anniversary of Fukushima. Also the BP Macondo is now a few years back, and I think the perception is fading slightly back in the mind of the energy leaders, the 1,000 that have responded to the question. Now, capital market, access to capital market. Let's be careful to read this one in the right way. We are going down in terms of uncertainty, not in terms of impact. Access to capital for energy, for utilities, for oil and gas, has become tougher. Utilities, that's a quote out of the financial sector, utilities are no longer the darling of the financial industries. Why? They have much greater exposure to political risk and other forms of risk. Think as well of extreme weather events, think of all the kinds of risks that make it on the utility side tougher. Think of the Energiewende, the political risk, how it has changed the outlook for E.ON or RWE as an example. Think of ESCOM, South Africa, struggling. Think of some of the US utilities having to change their business models as well. And I could go on. So I think of TEPCO, Japan. Obviously, the access to capital in the utilities has become more difficult. Same is true, obviously, now in the oil and gas sector. You have heard, not with the collapsing oil price, obviously, many of the expansion projects have been delayed, capital expansion projects have been delayed, and that is obviously, you can read that here very clearly. What has moved up? First of all, Russia. Russia, that's global, huh? Let me put that together with Middle East and China and simply say geopolitics is back on the energy agenda. We have probably for some times, in the 90s you would have typically heard people say we do no longer have geopolitics as a relevant aspect in energy. Oil prices are in a certain range, and kind of nobody, it's market dynamic, there's only market logic that matters, and geopolitics do no longer play a role. I think today very few would actually claim that is still true. We have seen clearly, think of China, East and South China Sea. We have seen lots of complexity in terms of energy-related aspects, obviously Russia, but also Middle East. Geopolitics have made things bit more difficult than they were before. The other three issues that are moving up are actually a cluster. It's electric storage, sustainable cities, decentralized system. If you summarize those, I would say we see clearly, and again, keep in mind 1,000 from over 80 countries, so this is a trend globally. We clearly see the smart innovation piece has much greater credibility across the segment. This is oil, gas, electricity, government, kind of academia, across the spectrum has much greater trust in actually being part of the transformation. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. This is actually a very critical picture to keep in mind. Now, if you look a slightly longer term, way, first of all, let's take renewable energies and the energy efficiency. They have stayed at the same place since 2009, basically. Very robust across the various movements that we have seen otherwise. The one that is flying off the map is carbon capture and sequestration. Now, let me be clear, we are not saying this is a good thing. We say this is a very dangerous thing. But the reality is, leaders out there do not see CCS making a difference in time. And I think that is something we have to take extremely seriously, unless there is a change in policy, unless there are demonstration projects that are celebrated successes, unless there is ways to promote this technology, it's not going to happen. That's what the 1,000 energy leaders out there are saying. Now, if you quickly split up some of those bubbles into geographic, it's always interesting to see how different geographies think about an issue. The red bubble is always the one where we have the global perception, and then I have split it up into the various regions. You can see climate framework. North America is actually taking a real leap in saying this keeps me awake at night. It was further down a few years back, but I think with some of the recent announcements, is it EPA, coal-related, is it obviously the Obama-China handshake last year pre-COP, etc., with the big debate internally, clearly this issue keeps also North American, and particularly US leaders awake at night. On the least, I would say, on the region with the least attention on the issue, you see Africa. And I think probably I'm going to revert that with another one when we go back to extreme weather events. I'm coming back to that. Energy water nexus issue is, let's check out Europe first. Europe doesn't really care. Huh? Europe has a lot of water, and the brutal, honest truth is, in Europe, energy leaders do not have to care, because water is a local issue, and if you have water, you do not much care. But those who are in Middle East, obviously droughts. North America, think of shale. Latin America, think of the hydro, what happens in Brazil with the 80% hydro-exposed system, with the biggest drought in the central part of Brazil currently, which has all the storage facilities of hydro, and then at the same time flooding in the southern part of Brazil, clearly you see those regions clearly see a big energy-water nexus impact on the energy system. I mentioned extreme weather risks, you remember, where Africa was when it comes to climate framework uncertainty, it was down here. Now when it comes to extreme weather, Africa is actually on the other they clearly today see impact, be it droughts, be it other forms of extreme weather impacts, and are concerned with their energy systems about the impact, and I think that's an interesting one. Pre-COP, we see the regions, the unusual suspects when it comes to proactiveness with regards to COP, the Asia, Africa, Latin America are probably those who have, with extreme weather events and energy, water, food nexus or energy, water nexus, have the biggest concerns, and clearly there is a big link between climate and those issues. So that's one to keep in mind. There's some system dynamics questions hidden behind here. Large-scale hydro is one of the issues with the biggest differences in perception, and those can easily be explained. Some regions simply have, and some others do not have potential. Latin America has used only 23% of its hydro potential. Africa, 13% of its hydro potential. There is massive potential in those regions. Africa, think of Ethiopia, think of DRC. There is massive hydro potential out there, and I think some of the countries, including Ethiopia, are certainly in the process of trying to build or use that potential. CCS I've already mentioned. It's simply to say there's no single region that would end up here. Up to last year, North America would have been down here actually, but even North America we have seen move back, and that has been on the one hand explained by EPA withdrawing from some of the support schemes, but on the other hand also by cost overruns of some of the pilot projects, and that has simply undermined the outlook of CCS even in the US. Cyber threats, this very low. Globally, energy, if you simply look at the global bubble, it's not big on the map. But you have, and I'm going to come back to that, keep that one in mind, and then I'm going to challenge that a little bit later. You see North America, and you would also see individual countries actually putting this issue very high up. One anecdote, I'm talking to lots of people out there and collect anecdotes around cyber. There's lots of stories that can keep us awake at night, and one of them is, for instance, this one utility, I cannot say the name, but you would absolutely know it, saying, well, we have lost a 175 kV line for 3 days. We didn't know what happened, how it went down. 3 days later it went up. We didn't know how it went up again. We have no explanation for it. We believe it must be cyber. All our technicians say it cannot be cyber, but the working assumption is still it's cyber. So if things like that happen or can happen, think of what happened to Sony, think of what happened to Chancellor Merkel, think of what happened. There's so many examples that show that some of the movies dealing with the issue may become reality, and I think we should better prepare ourselves of how we can A, address the issue up front, and B, as well, be resilient to some of the impacts of that. Unconventionals, obviously North America has the biggest belief in unconventionals. That I'm not telling you something new, but it's very clearly visible. Let me go to Europe. Europe has, on the first, and you can see it, the one keep me awake at night issue, the number one, Russia. Clearly, Russia, I mentioned geopolitics globally, I've seen move it up, but Europe is clearly concerned about what is going on. Geopolitics-wise, concerned about natural gas question. Many, when we are talking to the sector and they see Russia so high up in Europe, say, whoa, we are probably a bit emotional here. The reality has been that through even Cold War, we have never actually had trouble getting the gas from Russia. There's lots of emotion in the picture when it comes back to energy. It's not an easy issue, but the energy reality has actually, through Cold War, not been affected by geopolitics. Energy price, climate framework, very similar to global. If you look at the action agenda, renewable energy efficiency, and China, India, very similar to global. If you look at UK, let's go to UK, Russia. When we moderated with the UK leaders group the discussion, I asked them, they filled this out, and I said, why the hell would in the UK Russia be on the top of the agenda? There is not really direct gas link from Russia to the UK, so you're not really directly exposed to any meaningful. And I think there was acknowledgement in the group that there was probably an emotional overreaction to what is going on. One is so much confronted to headlines that if you think it through, the reality is UK probably over-exaggerates the Russia. Interestingly, nuclear is relatively high up, energy affordability is relatively high up, and we have obviously heard statements from some politicians recently that have made the point in this context. Capital markets are relatively high up, and again the discussion has been probably UK or London being a financial centre and having lived through the whole financial crisis has slightly exaggerated the perception of the importance of capital markets. UK has no less easier access to capital markets than any other. The reality perhaps that one has to say, UK has to invest in the electricity side, and that investment is not flowing easily at the moment, and that could be the other way of explaining actually this access to capital market difficulty. Here, roughly the same. Global recession is still up there. Large-scale accidents. There were a few last year. The UK network, electricity was actually, the margin was really shrinking last year. It was really coming down very thinly because we have seen coal, gas and nuclear kind of incidents, and I think those who filled it out put those in the category of large-scale accidents simply to signal, well, there has been a number of things happening that have shrunk on the electricity side. The margin close to zero. Happily it was in summer and not in winter, because if it had happened in winter it would have probably been a very cold winter. What has changed, this is actually quite dramatic. CCS and unconventionals both have lost significant traction in the UK, and again I think we have seen some government discussion on the CCS side, but we have also seen the fact that there was lots of resistance, environmental resistance to unconventionals, and on top of that I think the euphoria that came with the unconventionals a couple of years back is cooling down to a bit more of reality at the moment. Costs in the UK would not be as low for unconventionals as they are in the US, and I think that has contributed to a little bit of a cooling down of the unconventionals. What is clearly the biggest moving up issue were Russia and energy affordability, and I think it's particularly important to keep the energy affordability issue in mind. Now, Germany, again, look at Russia, electric storage, and the rest is kind of almost, we have a bit of innovative regulation, energy price, climate framework. So the difference here is Russia, you can say, is easily explained. Germany is directly importing gas from Russia, so they are clearly exposed to geopolitics here. Electric storage, that's an interesting one. Obviously, Germany has a system that hasn't, and here it's important to keep the figures in mind. The peak load in Germany is about 86 gigawatt, peak load. The installed capacity, solar and wind today, is about 70 gigawatt. So in a very windy, very sunny moment, you can almost 100% of electricity supplied by those wind and solar installations. And that said, if there is a peak in sun, a peak in wind, it may not always be easy to shut down all the other plants at once. That means you have actually moments when you have excess electricity generation, and we have seen moments of negative pricing in electricity in Germany. And I think that is one side, and if we see even further expansion of the renewable system, then you have obviously even more excess capacity. They may not be exactly in the places where you can absorb them, which makes storage increasingly important. Our estimations show that by 2040, Germany requires about 23 terawatt-hour equivalent of electric storage in the system to be able to absorb those peaks. They have currently, out of the 23 required, 0.05 terawatt-hour in the system. So clearly the recognition for the need for storage is there. Now the good news is, today we have in the European system 122 terawatt-hour electric storage. Mostly Norway and Sweden, hydro. some Germany, Austria and Switzerland. But the Austria and Switzerland are easy to access, but it's only about 15 terawatt-hour equivalent. The rest is up there in Norway and Sweden, and we don't have the interconnectors yet, and not the market signals as well. So in the meantime, what happens? The fact that electricity prices are so low and flooded by zero marginal cost electricity, solar and wind, undermines the business case of the existing storage. So Swiss and Austrian hydro storage plants write off, actually, they make deficit at the moment, they make actually losses at the moment. And keep that in mind. So at the same moment where Germany needs more storage, they undermine the business case of existing storage where it is, and obviously do not help to make the business case to access storage elsewhere. Very important system. That's the reason why everybody calls for market change, for market redesign. We need incentive mechanisms for storage in the market. We need incentive mechanisms for backup capacity, and that's the reason why innovative regulation is so high up in the market. Everybody is talking about innovative regulation on the electricity side, but the reality is as well, we cannot stop at the boundary of electricity. We have to think, what happens to gas? If we want to believe that gas is in moments of kind of, when we dry out of wind and when there's not a sunny or not a windy moment, you need to have something else. It's either storage or it needs to have a backup. And gas is probably as the perceived best solution in those moments. Now, if the role of gas shifts from an energy role to a system relevant role, what does it make? It decreases massively the volume of gas supply. That makes the infrastructure that has to still deliver that gas suddenly slightly more difficult to actually finance. And that is also a market design issue. So when we are talking about the need for market redesign, we think about, first of all, electricity, backup capacity and storage, but don't stop at electricity. This has implications far beyond electricity. And if you want to believe in a future where there is a gas market network that is alive, possibly to transport hydrogen, possibly to transport, to be a storage part with power to gas, that network also needs to be incentivized, possibly by market mechanisms. We are not at the end of this story, but this is clearly a hot topic in Europe, in Germany first of all, but in Europe, around Germany, and this is a very, very critical issue. Now, renewable energies, energy subsidies, EU cohesion, US policy. Why is US policy here in Germany? Competitiveness loss. The competitiveness loss, I think this is a proxy message cry out of Germany. We have lost competitiveness against US, and I think that is the reason why US policy is where it is. Again, electric storage, I mentioned it. This is Germany, this is world, EU, UK. Germany puts storage very high up. France puts it high up as well. France comes from the other end. Nuclear is not easy modulable, so you need storage for that reason. Germany has huge modulation and needs storage to compensate that. So those are two countries that clearly do need storage. Now, very briefly, I've run through, you can play with those maps and try and understand. It's a great tool to kind of challenge your own thinking. Geographies are different. Germany thinks different than the UK. The reality is very different in different places. I've started with, we are living in a new normal of great uncertainty. Now, as a policymaker, we advise policy as well. As a policymaker, how do you deal with that? How do you make sure, what is the biggest risk on the policy side? We say the biggest risk is political risk. If your money is shy, utilities are no longer the darling of the investors community, and therefore you have as a policymaker to bring political risk as low as you can. How do you do that? And we are saying there's three fundamental policy relevant groups in every country. It's a group that cares about energy security first. If you're an owner of an aluminum smelter of a hospital, both of those can have by no means an interruption. If you have an interruption, you have the result that goes with it, and that they cannot afford. So there's constituent groups or parts of the industry in particular that cannot have, they need absolute security. And if it's not from the system, they have to build it up themselves. So that's the first group, energy security. Second group, energy security up there. The second group, households. Households want affordable energy. You have seen affordability moving up on the UK. Access in Africa, equity. Having access to basic electricity is a key development enabler. So the equity, energy equity is the household issue. Obviously industry wants also low prices, but the households will vote for another government if they have no affordability. And Mr. Miliband is trying to do that. Environmental sustainability is obviously the third group. The environmental groups who want clean environments, they are even in China. Today in China, they're probably the most important group when it comes to energy policy decisions. They had a decade of focus on energy access, very successfully delivered that. But at what cost? There is now lots of coal in the system of the environment group. It's dirty water, dirty air, dirty soil, dirty food, dirty everything, and they have to turn this round. And that is the environment group. So you have those three constituents, and the only way to make sure that you have political risk flows is to keep all those three constituents in reasonable satisfaction. If you neglect one of those systematically, you will lock yourself into a dead end. New government will come in, will say everything is different, and we call that political risk. And that's the reason, if you can smell political risk in a country, you're not going to go there as an investor. So everybody does need to attract money, and the logic behind the trilemma, which I'm presenting here, is at all times you need to keep those three in balance. If you lock yourself into only coal or only renewable, only coal to be cheap, only renewable to be cleaner, if it doesn't work, that's another thing, but only renewable to be clean, 20 billion tax levy suddenly make things actually expensive. So if you lock yourself into one of those dimensions, you cannot just decide from one day to another to change this again. A new government will have to come in and take drastic measures, and again, that's political risk that you want to avoid. Just to quickly show, we are ranking countries and scoring countries, and UK has a AAA. Still, you will be surprised, but UK is among only 3 countries, put on watch, yes, but only 3 countries have currently a AAA, and UK is one of the 3. But watch this one. Energy equity, 5A22, this is the rank. How do you read this? Energy security, equity, environmental, sustainability. So rank 9, 22 and 18 out of 119 countries. So this says UK is losing ranks here on the equity side in quite a speedy way. And that's the reason you have seen it on the issues monitor going up. That's the reason why probably Ed Miliband wants to try take political capital by saying let's freeze tariff and let's even reduce tariffs, and certainly successfully shine some of the investors away. Germany, very similar. Look at this one. Germany has only a triple B, not a triple A. Germany is much lower, it has a triple B, and equity is also losing. The equity side is clearly losing. It's not yet, if you look at the issue map, it's not yet at the threshold where it seems to be policy forefront, but clearly the trend is there. Now, with that, I simply want to put it back to policy. Let me end up with a bit of we are in the midst of our scenarios building process, and let me just end up with a bit of a thought line to leave you thinking by yourself afterwards. What we are saying is individual events over history have significantly changed energy yet and again. Let's quickly look at a few examples. Let's look World War I. There's an event which leads to this perception. I started by saying, well, why is perception important? Because perception mobilizes or demobilizes capital. And that mobilization of capital can open a window of opportunity for a new technology, and that can actually dramatically change. A few examples. The World War I is obviously a famous one, Churchill saying we need to have a speedy fleet and shifting from coal to oil, the fleet, which made a big change obviously in the importance of oil. Oil shocks in the 73-79 period, which created in the consuming countries the emphasis on energy efficiency and have hugely pushed energy efficiency development. In 9/11, you could argue 9/11 has created obviously even a greater emphasis on energy independence in the US and has enabled the capital mobilization behind shale gas and the shale revolution that we have seen today. So it has enabled the context where capital even easier was flowing into the whole shale development. Financial crisis, I've put this one in grey. This is perhaps too early to say, but an early signal from the financial crisis is Basel III. Key wording there, you cannot over leverage, meaning if you want to do a project, you have to have more own capital. You have to, the part that you can get from outside is smaller, which means actually you have to be richer to get stuff done, which means fewer people can get stuff done. It could have an impact on getting projects done. Actually, it could reduce the number of projects. We have tried to test that. I would not argue this one too strongly, but we are watching this one. Will it have an impact? Many say it's actually not as dramatic as some people fear at one time. Fukushima, clearly, the mood was anti-nuclear in some countries, particularly in Germany. It led to the Energiewende and almost single-handedly pushed the learning curve. Solar price collapse, you're familiar with the numbers, within 5 years from 4.7 to $0.6 per watt peak. Collapse, that's more than 80% collapse in only 5 years. That's a dramatic learning curve, obviously, development. Ukraine has led, the Ukraine crisis has led to an LNG push in Europe. Obviously, the whole LNG, we have now massive LNG ports in Europe in many places, and they're only partially used simply because there are too many. The China new normal, again, with much emphasis on qualitative rather than quantitative growth, that really pushes also the cleaner forms of energy, gas, nuclear, renewable. So push on that side. And you can also say that the shock, the oil shock, we have seen instances, this is probably anecdotal at this stage, but this has created instances of substitution of energy by oil. A few Japanese small examples of small utilities, small plants have switched from LNG to oil because oil was so cheap that it has actually outcompeted LNG in those places. And that's obviously a very small signal at this stage, but it's still an interesting one. But let's quickly go ahead and ask, what kind of things could we see going forward? What kind of other things could happen, actually? What if we had a cyber event, a big cyber event? What mood it would... We are still... Think back of agricultural moment when we were living in a monoculture on the agricultural side, and we had to go through tough learning to learn that actually monocultures are not very good. In IT, we are living in a time of monoculture. We may also have to learn that actually deconnectedness, there could be value. What we call efficiency today, everybody using the same, we called it efficiency in agriculture as well, by the way. And yet we have come away from efficiency, acknowledging that actually the greater efficiency is to have less mono and a bit more diversity, which is more robust. And who knows, perhaps in IT we have a similar kind of learning which pushes decentralized and local, more disconnected type of approaches. Who knows? What we are seeing is droughts. Think of Brazil, think of Africa, Middle East, Australia. Droughts do not only have impact on the energy system, it's obviously irrigation. It can push two things. It could, on the one hand, droughts can incentivize better regional collaboration on irrigation, which also potentially can have positive side effects for hydro. It can do the opposite. It can make countries put ring fences around their hydro opportunity, make things more nationalistic. You can do backup from gas or fossil fuels to kind of come up with the storage requirements that you have. So this is an interesting one to watch, and I will also have not only in Latin America, in Africa and other places. It could be a driver for regional integration. It could be, and for a large item. Hurricanes. You have seen the Japanese government has just hosted a resilience ministerial meeting with Ban Ki-moon and everybody involved, and the resilience is mostly focused on extreme weather events. Extreme weather events like hurricanes. Now, we are moving from a hard resilience, where you try to build things stronger and stronger, to a soft resilience, where the key word is you accept it's going to go down, but the question is, how do you bring it up quickly again and make it operational? You accept things can be so dramatic it's going to go down, but you want to locally empower, local solution, local empowerment to react quickly. And this is kind of this storage, diesel, combined heat and power, local backup and storage capacity in the center. The energy market design crisis in Europe. Again, think of if this goes into avoiding brownouts because we lack the backup capacity, etc. Local storage diesel could become more popular. More geopolitics means more nationalistic agendas. Local resources are more in the center. More China, think of more China. I've mentioned it before, the clean environment, but you have also to ask, there's a massive China nuclear build-up. What if? Nobody wants to ask the question, but what if something happened on the nuclear side on China? Probably the answer would be scalable pragmatism. We are now pushing gas energy even more, pushing renewables and energy efficiency even more. What I'm saying here is probably the following. There could be, think through the events. What kind of big events would generate moods, mindsets that help mobilize capital into a specific area? And here's the interesting thing. If you look at those, there is one area that is actually showing almost everywhere. There is a link of storage here, 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 here. Emphasis on storage in so many places. So I said I come up with a bit of a provocation around storage in the end. Why we see CCS currently flying off the map, I would actually argue that storage is among the issues where all the drivers, or many of the drivers that we look at, point at. And while today the learning curve on storage is still seems to look very slow, there is a lot of things that can happen to accelerate that. And storage is probably the thing that would most dramatically change our understanding of the energy system we are living in. Think of transportation. Transportation could be, if we have breakthrough in cheap storage, not Tesla Max, but a Tata type of approach in storage. Suddenly cheap electric storage would change the oil outlook from one day to another almost. It would change the renewable integration picture. It would change the rural electrification opportunity across Africa. It would change the way we think about smart and local in so many senses. It would change business models. It would change the need for market design or not need for market design. It would dramatically change the way we think about energy. And I promised I leave you with the one provocation, and that's my storage provocation. The one technology that can change it, watch it, or go there to, you're entrepreneurs, you're scientists, make sure you're part of the storage success story. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for an absolutely wonderful tour around global sort of energy, thought, thinking, and sort of innovation. As someone who works in photovoltaics, it's very, very satisfying to hear you sort of accept photovoltaics as a real solution, and that actually now the challenge is storage. I think that's a terrific statement. So we've got plenty of time for questions. So the floor's open for questions. So.
Yes, you made a comment about how the surplus of electricity from renewables in Germany is undermining storage in Switzerland and Austria, and that seems counterintuitive to me. Can you explain a little bit more why that is?
If you want to run a hydropower scheme, say a pump storage scheme, Switzerland, I'm Swiss. Swiss are very famous to do that and make lots of money from it. Now, the point is, if you have suddenly lots of cheap sun coming in and at a big part of the load curve, so a big part of the time amount, suddenly the time within which you have to, recuperate your money is very short, and the prices would have to go very high to actually allow you still in shorter time to get the money back, and that is the reason why. Basically, the prices do not go as high because there's always other options. You can bring in coal, you can bring in etc. So there's upper limits that avoid the opportunity there. So in short, zero marginal cost of renewables at longer hours shorten the opportunity time for the hydro storage to actually make money, and that money is capped. The amount that they can ask is capped by competition from, say, coal.
So the weighted average price over a period of time is actually going down.
It's absolutely, the time is shortened, the time is shortened, you cannot let it go upwards too high because there is an upper level that is typically coming from coal.
Yeah, so just coming back to that question, is there a technical solution to that, or is there only a market and incentive solution to that problem?
Actually, that's technical solution. This is really the key point here is we are going into, we have, all of us have learned we need to have marginal cost type of assumptions. But if you have zero marginal cost in a system, for a big system relevant part, if it's a marginal part of the system, it doesn't matter. But if suddenly you have an important part of your system being driven out of zero marginal cost, and that's the case for wind and sun, that does change the system. And that means actually suddenly things that were kind of working with a marginal cost approach do no longer work, and storage is a thing that does work with a marginal cost approach because you have to recuperate. And so technical solutions may not solve this one. We may need a market solution. Here's the German debate. German debate, you have, you can personify it. You have on the one hand, Mr. Gabriel who said, I want an energy-only system, meaning basically we can let prices go crazy in those very few moments when we lack storage, and they would solve the issue. And in an economist's purest way, you can say, okay, if everybody accepts prices going crazy, that will actually be a solution. But the fear is, and here's the other side. Johannes Tyson or the industry leader Elon would say, I do not trust those politicians. I do not trust those politicians because if prices go crazy, there is the first politician will come very quickly to say, why should the price be so high? We can also have a price cap at this level, and that would be the dead moment. So that's the reason why you have the two positions there. Again, short answer is, I do not see a technical solution. This is really a market design question that needs to come in to incentivize storage, to incentivize bringing the system back on track.
Well, first of all, can I thank you for a wonderful tour d'horizon of the global energy picture. I work for a company called Terrestrial Energy, which is in the molten salt reactor innovative nuclear space. And there wasn't much about Gen 4 nuclear and the proximity of that and potential for displacing coal there. Is that not quite on the sort of thought process on the map of people yet, or is it getting there?
We have seen the nuclear swinging a bit. And first of all, I could have shown the nuclear trajectory. Clearly, it has taken a big hit post Fukushima, and in some areas it has come back. Absolutely, Gen 4 is part of that discussion. So the small nuke discussion is coming up, but lots of the questioning in that space is obviously if you need a contract for difference now for the current nuclear, the Gen 4 would be slightly more expensive, and the small nukes even more expensive, and simply in a place where other development seems so rapid, there is no easy answer to this one. There is simply no easy answer, and I think that keeps you have a number of countries who go back to nuclear. You have seen Turkey, you have seen the UAE, obviously, you have seen a number of countries who move. China is moving very rapidly still on the nuclear front. And you have many other countries who say for either safety, security reasons, and others for cost reasons, kind of debate.
Okay. I think that there is a lot of cost innovation that we're bringing to the market that will change that dynamic very fundamentally. So I look forward to the awareness of that spreading.
Our scenarios we have, when we do, and I haven't spoken about our scenarios, we say solar, we are looking at what happens between now and 2050 in terms of energy needs. And we call this two different worlds. We call, and it's, I think, the symphony world and the jazz world. Symphony, what is symphony? Symphony is government takes a top-down approach and sets out a long-term objective. Think of China. Actually sets out long-term objectives and is running for those. Choosing technology, making sure that certain objectives are fulfilled in a certain moment. Jazz, on the other hand, government lays back and says we put fundamental regulatory, aspects into place, and then we let the market choose technology. And think of the shale revolution, which is a jazz result, as an example. And we are not arguing one is the right or the wrong approach, but we are seeing that nuclear Today, about 13% of primary energy in a jazz world would probably fall to 6% by 2050. In a symphony world, would probably be, because of those innovations, keep that share or even slightly increase. So it's really depending what type of attitude policymakers and governments take with regards to nuclear. This is a symphony technology. Nuclear is clearly symphonic technology, and I think the question is what approach governments take. Solar, we see from currently 0.2% between now and primary energy contribution, between now and 2050 go to somewhere between 6 and 16%. So same order of magnitude as nuclear, I don't know. So dramatic growth in solar.
Thank you. Yeah. There's a lot of coverage at the moment about concepts like the carbon bubble and stranded assets, and just be interested in your thoughts on those concepts, possible impacts on fossil fuel investment and so on. Just wondering if they should be one of the possible future shocks that should be going up on your list.
We see, and again, let me go back to scenarios for that one. When we are looking at our scenarios, particularly the coal side, coal is only the one that is most dramatic in that. When we are comparing today's energy mix, we have currently 80% of fossil energy with about 30 gigatons of CO2 per year. 80% is fossil. And if you break that down, oil, coal, gas, first of all, we see on the gas side expansion, 50 plus 50 to plus 100% volume increase between now and 2050. We see on the oil side basically stagnation, plus minus 15%. Why? Well, on the one hand you have more transport, and on the other hand you have more transport efficiency, and those two roughly even out. Now, I didn't here clearly we didn't look into the black swan storage breakthrough. Storage breakthrough could eat hugely into that one. If suddenly you have, why? Because you suddenly have direct competition of electricity versus oil. And electricity, let's not argue where it comes from, but it will not come from oil. So that it would eat into the oil. Now, coal, on the other hand, we see a plus minus 40% uncertainty outlook, and so plus minus 40. What this basically says, we are going from cheap coal to uncertain coal. And if you're an investor in a coal mine today and you have a plus minus 40% outlook uncertainty, you must love risk. So I think that's how we see it. We simply see that coal has massive uncertainty.
I'm currently writing a master thesis on energy hegemony. So I was wondering where you see the alternatives in terms of geopolitics and energy to the national concepts. Do you think that the energy union and the intergovernmental agreements, which were suggested by the European Commission, might be a feasible alternative or a solution to improve energy security?
So you're talking mostly Europe, huh? It's mostly a European question. And I think in terms of the agreement, if you first ask the question, what has happened? Thinking of Germany and France in particular, what has happened since the beginning, for the past decades? I don't think we have seen much progress in the way Germany or France get closer, with regards to their energy integration. We haven't seen much signal of that. My sense is that Germany, with their need for storage, will be in such a strong need for solutions. I mentioned the hydro, the northern hydro, that Germany will, with or without France, need to find ways to integrate. Is that a fully European? Is it a partial integration? I think from the German side you can expect that there is pragmatism towards the storage issue. Pragmatism means hydro, which is the cheapest storage. So I would actually expect that integration, there must be a willingness or a rationale that would point towards more market integration with the objective to access the northern electric storage if you have the German energy system. And I think that's a very relevant thing to keep in mind. For the rest, ETS is obviously a joint European approach, and I think I would trust that we are fixing ETS in Europe, and hopefully with COP finding ways to link it up with other big emitter schemes. So that would be probably the other thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, so just got two questions. So you mentioned earlier that US policy was a key concern for Germany to the extent that it affected its competitiveness. So could you please clarify what's meant by competitiveness in this instance and which aspects of US policy relate to it? And I'm also kind of curious how Germany ranked lower than the UK for energy sustainability. I mean, given that its renewable capacity is so high compared to its peak, and I'm not sure what the UK is.
First question on competitiveness, it's clearly shale gas and shale oil are so cheap, have made, the US have repatriated so much of their industry from the Middle East, even from China, from Europe. So clearly many regions have lost business who have gone back to the US or are going to the US simply for cheap energy opportunities. Europe has no easy answer to cheap energy. The cheapest answer to European energy was Russian gas, and that Russian gas is under pressure. So clearly that issue keeps the competitiveness issue at the forefront. It's the first one. The second one on why is Germany a triple B? They would obviously argue they're better than that, but why is in our measure Germany a triple B? Germany has the highest renewable share, but they are also consuming a lot of coal. So CO2-wise, it's actually not that good a story to tell for now. System stability-wise, it's not that good a story to tell now. So the security, if you don't have the storage in the system that you actually would require, it's actually a tough security challenge. We have seen again negative pricing, etc., and that has always been solved. But the limits of stability are perhaps closer there. Germany is also greatly relying on imports in many areas, while UK still has own sources in the North Sea, etc. Germany doesn't have own oil or gas type of resources. So there's a number of reasons that put UK in simply a favourable position on the energy security side, on the energy environment side, and particularly we have seen on the energy equity side, both are losing out. And UK is, I should say, UK has last year gone on watch for we see the deterioration on the equity side, but it has gone on watch actually for energy security reasons, because UK with the thinning margin on the electricity side was very close to a danger point, and therefore went on watch on the security side. Let me put it that way. Triple B is actually still a good ranking. I should say the worst is D. Triple B is still good balance and a relatively good ranking. They're still number, was it 14, I believe, out of 119. It's very tough to get a triple A, and it's gotten tougher. We have last year had 5 AAA, it has gone to 3, and even one of those 3 is on watch. So it's very tough to have a triple A.
One more question. So Sarah in the back.
Yes, you talk about the installed capacity, energy security, and all that. I have a number of questions. Number one is if an African government leader whose country is experiencing power outages due to shortage of capacity, generation capacity, what would your suggestion be to that country to sort out the shortage? Bear in mind that there are elections to come, substations are being burnt because people cannot get electricity even in the capital city for 4 days. What would your suggestion be, or what will your organization's suggestion be to that country? Are you treating developing countries on the same level as developed countries in terms of sustainability climate change, or you vary your requirement so that these countries can, as it were, put their feet on energy ladder to move their country out of poverty?
I think those are two questions actually. The one is I published 10 years ago a paper on the energy Maslow, which basically says, Maslow, you're familiar with the Maslow concept, which is saying you have basic needs and you have to fulfill your basic needs before you go to self-realization. And Maslow is a very, says you actually always, before going a step higher, you would have to satisfy the more basic needs. And in energy, we see a similar kind of pattern. If you do not have access, there's only one priority: get access. If you do not see energy, once you have access today, you want that access tomorrow. That's energy security. Once you have that access tomorrow, you want to bring costs down. And only then are you starting to think about environment. And I think the political reality has been that basically all countries have followed that trajectory. Now, let me qualify that. It is not because that is, it's actually, we are saying as an organization, it's absolutely legitimate to follow this Maslow hierarchy. Is it strategic? That's another question. Now, let me qualify this strategic. Strategic means that when you're in a higher, when you have actually moved up the ladder, if you haven't done your job right, you have to spend more to turn this around. It's difficult to plan that in earlier, but there are things that you can do to actually get, to have better trilemma balance up front. So our advice is at all times keep the trilemma in mind and always not strive for one thing, not for coal only, as an example, but try to balance with local opportunities. So we have not a single approach for countries. We have to say every single country has own local opportunities. Look at what those are. Combine the various ones. Diversity is always a good thing. It always helps. And we with that approach, I think we try to contribute to sustainability thinking.